Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and the continuing discussion on the plague that I forgot to record over the weekend while I was in Florida because I'm an idiot. All right, it happens to the best of us, right? It's not a big deal. We cut a couple of questions off your test. I'm going to work on grading those bad boys this week, and I'll get them out to you as soon as I can. But the big thing about it, though, is we're going to pick up right now, right where we left off in class, finishing our discussion about the Black Death before we start our new theme in this unit starting tomorrow, which is going to be about the Renaissance, right? So the Renaissance. I love talking about it, and also you're gonna get your first project ever assigned by me. It's not hard, it's a lot of fun, everybody loves it every year, but you'll be fine. Let's get after it though, so we don't take too much time on this flip, right? Because I'd like for some of you to be able to get it mostly done in S period. So going into it, so we understand, is we left off talking about large scale. Hey, what'd you have? Bring it back here. What'd you get? Sorry, hold on one second, guys. What do you have? No. Sorry about that, y'all. My lovely little dog, Pierre, decided to go into my bag and try to steal some of my stuff and destroy it. Now, anyway, big thing about it, though, is we left off talking about the disgusting sight of the cities in the Middle Ages, Pierre, right? They were so gross. Just duty in the streets everywhere. And we started talking about what caused that urbanization, right? We started discussing how agricultural technology, including the plow and the mill, is going to begin to push people into cities, and these cities just were not ready to handle this large-scale migration, right? And this large-scale migration, which is referred to as urbanization, which urbanization is the movement of people from rural areas to towns and cities, is going to cause them to be absolutely disgusting. Now, another reason why, though, they got so gross, because some of y'all are like, well, Mr. J, why didn't they just go to the bathroom out in the woods? Well, that's a really good question, but something that you have to understand is a lot of medieval cities have fortified walls around them, right? Which actually limited their ability to expand, and instead what people did is they started adding floors onto their house, right? Just piling more people inside of these cities, leading to even grosser conditions, right? Now, other big things that we need to understand is there's two other big causes of the plague of why it hit Europe so hard, all right? So this is continuing that entire discussion of why Europe was just like the chef's kiss, perfect place for the plague to break out, right? So two big reasons are climate change and famine, all right? Well, climate change is going to cause famine, which is also going to make them more susceptible to the plague. But by the 1300s, the population of Europe was very high, right? It had grown exponentially. You've got a new higher, you've got new products coming in. You've got people living a little bit longer. And also because the High Middle Ages is a period of more economic prosperity, which always coincides with people's life expectancy increasing, right? So something's going to end up happening, though, right around the turn into the late Middle Ages, right? And it's this thing known as the Little Ice Age, right? Which is a climate shift, all right? So climate changes occurred right around 1300 or starting right around 1300, and these climate changes are going to hit Europe at a time that they're really not ready to handle it, right? And Europe is going to end up actually producing not one, not two, but 3 different years of crop failures because of this, right? Because of the excessive amount of rain. Now, some of you are like, but Mr. Terry, I thought you said it was a little ice age. Yes, but like this climactic shift at first, before getting extremely cold and actually having several years of extremely brutal winters, it also caused a lot more rain patterns, right? And certain crops, when they are overwatered, are going to die, right? And crops like these include barley and wheat, which most people actually survived off bread at the time. And this is going to cause the famine, all right, or the Great Famine is what it's referred to, of 1315 to 1317, all right? As many as 15% of the peasants in some English villages died during this famine, right? Now, keeping this in mind, some of you are like, is it just in England? No, we just use that as a good estimate, right? If it's killing about 15% of English peasants, it's probably killing about the same percentage of people in places like France, Italy, Spain, etc., right? Now, the famine that was caused, though, is also going to decrease people's ability to stave off disease, because that is one consequence of starvation and poverty, is that your susceptibility to disease increases, right? If you are in a poorer community, if you are in a lower SES bracket, typically what ends up happening is you actually are more susceptible to disease, and you also have the lesser ability to fight it. And it also right here is actually a graph that actually shows you those different climatological shifts, right? The Black Death plague is going to break out. Actually, this is a little bit like right here. As you can see, the average temperature is beginning to decrease. But now what we need to understand, though, now that we understand that like climatological shifts can cause crop failures and famine and lead to higher susceptibility to disease, now we need to ask ourselves, well, where did the plague actually come from, right? Well, the very first evidence of the plague that we see in any type of historiography or any type of records that have been kept during this time period pops up in China, because we actually are going to see some of the earliest recordings. Now, China, of course, was a part of that Eastern Golden Age and the Monsoon Marketplace, so their ability to record and document historical evidence is going to be much higher than that of Europe at the time, right? And one of the biggest accounts we saw is actually in Beijing. They had 120 million residents before the plague began, and they are going to go down to as little as 65 million, right? So we are going to see the plague not only hit Europe, but we need to understand that this was actually a global pandemic at the time, all right? It's going to affect most all communities and large-scale communities that are actually existing during the 1300s, all right? The thing we need to understand, though, as well, is we don't know specifically where the plague popped up first, but we do believe that it probably started in a plague reservoir in Western Mongolia, right? Now, what a plague reservoir is you have to understand is that the plague bacteria usually will just kill an individual animal, or maybe a handful of them, right? Because bacteria must spread via contact or be a close quarter contact, and that's why it hit human beings so hard during the 1300s as urban density began to pile up, right? However, plague reservoirs are typically vast forests where there's little to no humans that live out there, and the plague can just kind of slowly kill or affect every a few animals that it comes into contact with, right? But the thing that we need to understand is probably what ended up happening is someone either ate one of those animals or came into contact with those animals and then began to carry the plague into a city, right? And then we are going to see a highway of the plague basically occur on what is known as the Silk Road, right? And the Silk Road is a huge trade route that spanned all the way from China all the way to Europe, right? And so what's going to end up happening is you're going to see the movement of this plague be caused mostly by merchants and traders, right? Because you have to understand something really quickly here. Merchants have boats and they have caravans and they have stuff, right? And that stuff tends to attract vermin like rats. And the thing that we need to understand is it's not the rats that caused the plague necessarily, nor carried the plague effectively and gave it to humans. It's actually the fleas that resided upon them, right? These fleas that rode around on these rats that were attracted to the Silk Road because of the items moving on it are going to be the conduit that spreads the plague like wildfire, right? Now, the Mongols, though, are also going to, we believe, be the reason why the plague ends up hitting Europe, right? We think that the Mongolians or the Mongolian horde at the time that was actually under the control of the Khans still is going to be the reason why it ends up hitting Europe, all right? Because we believe patient zero came from a small city called Kaffa, right? Now, Kaffa is a small city on the Black Sea, right? It's actually located right there, right? And the Golden Horde, or the Khans, all right, that actually were controlling that area known as the Mongolians, were actually sweeping into Eastern Europe, right? Trying to take over as much land as possible. Now, one strategy that the Mongolians typically had that they may or may not do when they're raiding a city like Kaffa that was right there on the Black Sea is they might use these things known as trebuchets or catapults to launch items at the city. Well, the Mongolians, who had seen this plague and were being affected by it, decided to use it as a weapon, right? And so what they decided to do is put dead bodies into that catapult and launch them into the city of Kaffa. And what ended up happening is one of those bodies probably burst open, the bacteria became slightly airborne, hit somebody, that person then jumped on a boat and then sailed to the island of Sicily in 1347. We believe, or we have enough historical data to believe, that that is the way the person, patient zero, came from that city as the Mongolians were attacking it and then landed in Italy in 1347, right? And what's going to happen is the plague just begins to spread like crazy. As you can see with this map right here, it ends up actually landing right there in 1347 in Messina, and then it starts spreading throughout the rest of Europe, right? Now, going into it, though, we have to understand as well, these rats are going to continue to carry it, these fleas are going to continue to carry it, but what we need to understand is how did the plague spread so quickly, right? Okay, on top of rats, on top of everything else, what's going to be the reason that by 1350, the plague is everywhere, right? Well, the reason why the plague is everywhere by 1350 is because you have to understand there are two forms of it, right? There are two forms of contracting the plague, or two ways that you can get it. There's the bubonic form of the plague, and then there's the pneumonic form of the plague, all right? The bubonic form of the plague is spread by fleas. These fleas that are coming off different vermin, like rats or other kinds of vermin or rodents that are moving around through Europe at the time, are going to be the direct conduit that most people are going to be interacting with the plague and how they're getting it, right? Now, you have to also understand you can get it from scratches and bites from rats, but that's a little bit more rare. You can also get it from handling dead animals that had the plague as well, which is also a little bit more rare. Most Europeans got it from these gross little guys, right? Now, the reason why the fleas are going to be the biggest conduit or the biggest transferable or transference of the plague itself has to do with the way the bacteria replicates itself, right? So fleas, whenever they consume your blood, the bacteria of the plague is inside of it, right? So they would typically harvest it from rats or other different kind of small rodents and stuff like that. And what ends up happening is the flea would then hold this blood inside of them, right? Using it for digestion and also to fertilize their eggs, okay? And then what ends up going down is they would hop onto something else to then harvest or feed off them as well. Well, on in the flea's body is the bacteria is beginning to replicate inside of them, causing a blockage inside their throat. And what's the only way to clear it out? To regurgitate, right? So the flea, whenever they would bite humans, would go like bleh, and it would literally bite down and then throw up inside the person's body, spreading the plague bacteria into the human host, right? That is basically the main way that it spread in that nature from those fleas and vermin. Now, the other form of the plague is known as the pneumonic form of the plague, and that's going to be late stage plague because you've had it for a little while, right? So basically what ends up happening is in your later symptoms, your lungs may begin to bleed, or you also may actually begin to collect fluid on the inside of your body. The bacteria for the plague, the Yersinia pestis bacteria, will grow in some of that fluid, and what ends up happening though is how does your body try to get fluid out? It expectorates, right? It is going to sneeze or cough, and when you're doing that, you are spreading airborne droplets into the air, which is another way that people were able to get the plague in the pneumonic form of it, right? Because some of you don't realize just how much stuff comes out of your face whenever you sneeze, but y'all, it's bananas. It's rocketing out of your face at around the range of 60 miles per hour, and that's how much gunk comes out of your mouth whenever you sneeze, which is super, super, super gross. But that is another way that you could end up spreading the plague in the pneumonic form, right? Now, the symptoms of the plague were also extremely intense, and they're going to also have a little bit of a reason on the spread as well. For example, whenever somebody got the plague, they would typically present what's known as a bulbus, which is your lymph nodes in your body trying to harness the bacteria and kill it, but unfortunately what ended up happening is your body couldn't kill it as fast as the bacteria could replicate, causing swelling on your lymph nodes and causing your lymph nodes themselves to get infected, right? So that bulbus right there that would turn into basically like a giant whitehead underneath your skin would sometimes need to be lanced, right? And so that was one of the main protocols for trying to cure the plague, was to lance those bulbi open, right? Which is to cut them open and drain that stuff out. Well, what's going to end up happening is that doctor that just did that might also come into contact with the plague and then end up getting it themselves, right? Now, if you saw this particular symptom of the plague, it basically meant you were guaranteed to die. And it's known as septicemia, or the septicemic form of the plague, right? Basically what ends up happening there is your flesh is beginning to go septic, and it's becoming necrotic, and it's beginning to rot, right? So this right here, of course, is somebody that had the septicemic plague, and you can see the tips of their fingers are beginning to rot away, right? And it's almost a 100% mortality rate if you see septicemic symptoms of the plague itself. Now, the thing that we need to understand, though, also, is that this is going to cause mass hysteria within Europe, right? And so typically when mass hysteria is caused by a disease, you're going to see people come up with a lot of popular medical cures on how they think they can fix it or get rid of it, right? But the thing about it, y'all, is that the Middle Ages Europeans weren't as advanced as some of the people in the Eastern kingdoms, okay? And so they're going to come up with really wacky, ridiculous ways to try and get rid of the plague. For example, some of y'all have seen documented evidence, or some of the costumes of plague doctors, right? Plague doctors, we've only ever seen a couple of documented pieces of evidence of it, but apparently they wore very strange costumes that almost looked like a bird, right? And the reason why is because they would shove herbs and spices into the end of the beak to try and prevent actually smelling the people that had actually had come into contact with the plague so badly, right? But it basically served as like an early surgical mask, all right? Now, the other thing about it, though, as well, is like I said, there's only a few documented cases of those costumes popping up, but we do believe that it's going to happen at least once or twice. And if it happened once or twice, then it's a fun thing to talk about, right? Now, another big thing about it, though, is you're going to see bathing in human urine, people tying onions to themselves or bathing in vinegar. Bloodletting was another big believed method to cure the plague, which is when they would use a little device like this to cut open one of your veins and drain the blood out of you, right? They would also use leeches to try and clear it out as well, which was not effective. They also believed that if you rubbed a chicken's butt all over your body, like if you plucked the feathers out of a chicken and rubbed the chicken all over you, it might help, which didn't do anything. And there was also another one called unicorn horn, eating or imbibing the dust from the horn of a unicorn. But I'll tell you that little story tomorrow in class, and we'll talk about how that one's actually absolutely ridiculous, right? But the last thing we need to talk about is the effects of the plague, right? Because you're going to see a large number of effects of this plague, right? First and foremost, we'll kind of outline them all together, but number one, you're going to see an upsurge in faith and in religion, you're going to see an upsurge in religious practice. That's a better way of putting it, right? That's a terrible bullet point structured by me. Sorry about that. But don't worry, you're going to get some Mr. Mathern style arrows popping up here in about 2 seconds to really help you with the organization of your notes, right? So basically what you're going to see is an upsurge in faith, right? People are going to actually become more religious, and they're going to become more like not Christian in a sense, but they're going to actually depend on God to help kind of avoid this. They're going to pray more, they're going to go to church more, and you're going to also see a lot of church members get involved in trying to stop the plague, like monks and nuns trying to give people medical like care and stuff like that. So you're going to see a larger growth in that kind of excuse me, in that practice, right? Because surprisingly, Christianity and the church grew more powerful because of the plague, right? Because they were more directly involved with the helping of it. You're also going to see the growth of like some religious offshoots, and people are going to believe that God was punishing them for this plague. One of Mr. Mathern's favorite things to talk about is these people called the flagellants that used to roam around Europe and actually beat themselves as a form of penance, right? Now, penance you refer to usually as like confession, but these people would be like saying prayers and going like, pow, and just like hitting themselves in the back. And for any of y'all that have ever seen this scene in Monty Python, or your parents that have ever seen it, probably understand what a flagellant is pretty well. Exactly. That movie, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, makes fun of flagellants as well as they're hitting themselves in the face while they pray, right? Now, another one that you're going to see is the artistic representation is going to begin to become obsessed with death and realism, right? You're going to see some engravings beginning to pop up in the late Middle Ages, and you're also going to see some later Renaissance art pop up that's going to become obsessed with death, skeletons, the dance of death, and macabre themes that are going to reflect the impact of the plague as well. The economy is also going to greatly change as well, because during the plague itself, there was high unemployment and economic stagnation. But here's where things get weird. After the plague, though, you're going to see an economic boom, mostly due to the fact that there's a lot less people. And since there's a lot less people, there's less competition, because the money that people leave behind after they die isn't just going to vanish into thin air. It's going to get reintegrated into the economy. And since people aren't competing with as many people in their jobs or in their villages or towns, you're actually going to see more money going into the pockets of individuals rather than being spread over more people, right? Because there's going to be more specialty crops, there's going to be more specialized jobs, and also more money in the hands of other people, right? You're also going to see a population decrease, which, well, duh, right? People die when there's a disease. And we believe that anywhere from 75 million to 200 million people in Europe died from this illness, right? And then last but not least thing that is very much not least is you're also going to see a growth in anti-Semitism, right? Now, what you need to know about anti-Semitism, it's a very real thing that people still deal with all the time today, but what anti-Semitism is the industrialized, the industrialized racism, in a sense, towards people of the Jewish faith, right? So a lot of Christians in a lot of different towns and villages began to blame Jewish people for the plague itself, leading to an increased persecution and lashed out violent acts against those people, right? But that right there is where we're going to wrap it all up, keeping it nice and under 20 minutes, but I'll see y'all soon. Talk to y'all in class tomorrow. Have a good one.